There we go.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Beneath the Lift Tower, a fans podcast by fans for fans of Northampton Saints. My name's Charles McGillivray and I'm once again joined by Jess Keble and Simon Stacey. This is a special edition of the show where we've got a special guest to interview. Born in Chester in England, he began his professional career at Sale Sharks, making 54 appearances, winning the Premiership title in 2006. He later joined Northampton Saints, going on to make 250 appearances over a decade at the club, including winning the European Challenge Cup in 2009 and scoring a try in the 2014 Premiership final triumph. During his period at Saints, he also earned 34 caps for England, scoring 7 tries and winning the 2011 Six Nations, plus going to the 2011 Rugby World Cup in New Zealand. Following his time at Northampton, he moved to the US, joining Rugby United New York, where he finished his illustrious career. Saint 1862, Ben Foden, how you doing?
I'm good, Charles. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, I think we won the European Challenge Cup twice though when I was there.
Oh, of course, it was the double winning season, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was scoring that.
I'm happy to. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for coming on, Ben. I think it'd be great to start with start of your career, and obviously you started at Sale, but it'd be great to know about how you got into rugby and sort of your beginnings in the sport.
Yeah, like so many other people, my dad was the big force behind me. Him and his mates grew up playing rugby. He went to rugby boarding school down the road from Northampton, so he was always rugby mad. He took me and my brother to Crewe and Nantwich Rugby Club when I was 4 years old, and they didn't have touch rugby or flag rugby back then. It was all tackle, and I played for the under-8s at 4 years old. And supposedly, I can't really remember it. But we were miserable and we didn't like it because it was always raining. It was always cold. The kids were bigger than us. Supposedly I was quite quick. So he was like, oh, you actually stood your own. So it only lasted probably like a year. And then we didn't really want to do it again, my brother and I. And so we went and played Cubs football and all these other sports. And it was until the age of around 8 or 9. Other friends of mine had joined Chester Rugby Club. And we're enjoying it, and so we got back into it, which delighted my dad. So he became our coach under 8s, under 9s, or whatever it was, and that's the start of my rugby journey. I played at Chester Rugby Club in the Midtown. I played for my school, but it wasn't very serious. Where Chester, my age group, became very successful. We actually cheated though, because my brother is a year older than me. And we were twins, and we were the 9-10 combination for our team. So yeah, we might have a few titles taken off us, but we were, Cheshire champions for, I think it was like 7-8 years in a row. And I always say to anyone who's playing, listen, rugby's really, really fun, but when you win and you're part of a good team, it's way, way funner. and with the success that came from an early age, we used to have like 50, 60 kids turning up to play for Chester, whatever the age group was, whether it was under 11s, under 12s. And we had brilliant players. We weren't the biggest team either, which, everyone who saw us come onto the field were always going to be like, oh, we're going to beat these guys because they're only little. But we were so fast and our skill set was really good. And, we used to spend hours on the field doing 3-on-2s and Auckland grids. And, my dad's big coaching emphasis was sort of skill set and being able to push the ball. And you watch an age group rugby, it's usually like one pass and then they carry and give it to the fastest kid, where we were actually a team who had set moves and we would pass the ball, between 5 guys and get it to our speedsters on the wing. So we were quite advanced in the way we played the game, and it was so enjoyable. But my dad was quite ruthless in terms of his coaching style. We would train on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and in the off season we'd come in on a Tuesday and Thursday, and we do touch rugby when we weren't playing and just play for like an hour and a half of, fitness games, even at the early age of like 12, 13. And then obviously, rugby started, turned professional went around that age. And I started playing for, so I played for Chester, and then there was Cheshire clubs, which ran into, north of England clubs, and then ran into England clubs at under 16s. And it was at that point when I started playing for England under 16s that I was like, hey, that actually might be a career here for me to sort of get into. And my dad was a big pusher of it, although he used to play a lot of mind games with me, saying that I was lazy and that I'd never make it. But he was always pushing me to get. This is my daughter, by the way. He's just poking me. But he was just, he was very instrumental to it. And obviously, once you get to that stage as well, sort of 15 years old, everything gets a lot more serious in rugby. Academies start, especially now, academies start paying a lot more attention to the young guys. Sorry, Farah, can you go in the other room, please? That's the problem with these live interviews. So once that happened, the rest was sort of history. It happens very quickly. I went to a boarding school in Bromsgrove on a rugby scholarship. They were very serious about the game. And to be honest, it was probably the first taste of what professional rugby would be like, because I was at the school for rugby. Yes, I was there for an education, but, we trained 4 days of the week. We played on Saturday. The whole school would come out. It was a very big rugby school. I think Ollie Lawrence went there. Andy Good went there. There's been a few guys who have passed through who have gone on to have great careers. Matt Mullen was another one, and Matt Mullen's father was my rugby coach at Bromsgrove. And then from them, they had links to Harlequins Academy, Gloucester Academy, Worcester Academy. I'd already sort of agreed that I was going to go to Sale Academy because I was sort of involved with that when I was 15, 16. And then when I became 18 and finishing school, that's where I went and played my first sort of professional rugby and got my first professional contract.
It was an interesting time at Sale as well, because they obviously had the time you were coming through that, they went through that sort of, Jim Mallon started, and then Philippe Saint-Andre continued to sort of a lot of big names and internationals coming into the club that obviously accumulated in the 2011 championship winning team. Mm-hmm. That must have been a phenomenal time to be involved with Sale.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, at the time, I didn't really realize how lucky I was to play with the likes of Sebastian Chabal, Jason White, Jason Robinson, Charlie Hodgson. Richard Wigglesworth went on to have, one of the best careers in Premiership rugby that there is, winning so many titles and playing so many games, and now he's coaching England. I was very lucky, to work with the likes of Mark Cueto. Jason Robinson was an idol of mine growing up as well. And so to play with that guy and see him, what he did on the field and learn from him. At the time, I didn't realize how lucky I was, but now looking back, I'm like, Jesus, I was very lucky to be around those guys and learn from those guys. And the other thing with Jim is, Jim Mallender was my coach and Steve Diamond was the forwards coach when I got there in the academy. And so I spent a bit of time with Jim. He was probably there a year and a half, 2 years before Philippe Saint-Andre took over and all these big names, the French names came over, Sebastian Bruno and Chabal and Fiore and all these guys. But, being there, being around that environment and seeing how hard they were pushing the game of rugby, because they left Hayward Road, which was, Sale's home ground for years, and gone to Stockport, and they were trying to figure out where they wanted to be. And no one wanted to go and play at Stockport on a Friday night. It was normally cold and wet. The ground was like sand. And, people were miserable turning up there. And obviously we were a very good team. But that year that we won the Premiership, no one would touch us at home. We used to stuff everyone. It was very rare that we were beaten at home in that year. And then we played the semi-final. And weirdly, I wasn't really involved in the team that much. I was on the outskirts. And then towards the end of the season, I played a second team game against, was it Broughton Park? It was like a national two-side. And I wasn't supposed to be playing. And I'd actually been running around with a load of friends back in Cheshire, getting up to mischief. And I got a call on the Friday, I think it was the Friday night, or actually I think it might be the Saturday evening. So and a few days with friends doing things, running around, having a few beers, and got a call from James Wade, who was our academy coach, and said, "Hey, Mikey Burgess has got injured. So we need another wing." I was playing scrum half at the time, but they were using two other scrum halves, Mark Simpson Daniel, brother of James Simpson Daniel, and I think Joe. It might have been. It could have been Wiggy. It could have even been Richard Wigglesworth playing, but someone else had dropped down, so they didn't need me to play scrum half. But they said, "Listen, we need you to get here because you're going to start on the wing." And I was like, I always do what I'm told, but I couldn't drive at the time. My parents were away. I had to call my granddad to come and pick me up. I went there, got my boots. So Mark Simpson Daniel lent me his spare pair of boots, and I played on the wing, and I scored 3 tries in front of Philippe Saint-Andre, and he was like, "Hey, if there's an injury in the first team, this guy's going to get called up above everyone else," because they thought I played really well. So James Wade, who was my academy manager at the time, was like, "You did really well. Listen, if there's an injury, you're going to get called up." Lo and behold, a week later, I think Steve Hanley pulled his hamstring, and I was called in to play in the Challenge Cup against Catania, who are a team from Sicily. So, from not really being involved with the first team to being thrown in. And once that happened, I never really left. I trained with the first team all the time. I played on the wing, or I benched at 9. And then towards the end of the season, we'd already qualified with a home semi-final against Wasps. And so they were putting out like a second string team against Northampton Saints, lo and behold, in the year that they weren't doing very well. And our second team was still pretty strong. And I played scrum half and played really well. We won the game, which we weren't supposed to. I think I scored 2 tries, or set one up and scored a try or something like that. And the next day on the old rugby club with Stuart Barnes and co, they were bigging me up something chronic. And in that, so in the semi-final, they actually dropped Wiggy. Lilo Martin started, and they put me as a sort of like a replacement to sort of change the game if needs be. And during that game, Salilo dislocated his shoulder with about 25 minutes to go. So I went on, I slowed the game, took all the momentum out of the game, and just killed it off. And we won the game, and we're in the final. But obviously, they were thinking about starting me in the final, but I'd only sort of started 1 or 2 Premiership games. And so I remember going in for the semi-final and hearing Wiggy arguing with Philippe Saint-Andre, and I didn't even bring my bag in from the car because I thought I wasn't going to be involved. And then Wiggy comes out and says, "Hey mate, just want to say congratulations, you're on the bench." So I was like, "Wiggy, can you do me a real big favor? I know this is a nightmare because obviously you've been dropped, but can you get my bag for me out of my car while I go into the weeds?" Really rubbed salt in the wound. And we had 2 weeks. So once we played that game, there was a 2-week break to the final. And I remember I lived with Wiggy at the time as well.
Right.
So he's a really good mate of mine. And Wiggy was like, he said, "Listen, there's nothing against you here, but I have to go in and like argue for the starting spot in the final because, if I get pushed to 3rd string now, like I'm knackered, Salilo's going to be here, you're going to be here. They're probably going to bring someone else through, and it's really going to mess up my future at the club." And I was like, "Yeah, dude, I was 19 years old at the time. I was like, yeah, go for it." So Wiggy went in and argued his case, saying like, "How can you start Ben? He's only played like a handful of games. You need experience." Wiggy got the start. He actually got man of the match in the final as well and played really well. And I went on for 20 minutes, which I was delighted about. So, I think one of my favorite photos is me and Wiggy walking around the stadium holding the trophy together. So it worked out very well in the end. And and from that moment, it sort of felt like after we'd won that tournament as well, won the Premiership with Sale, it was their first one. But literally the year after, you could sort of sense that from the players and everyone involved that it felt like job was done and people were sort of like going off in different directions. And it's one of the reasons why I think I stuck around for 1 more year, because Jason Robinson retired and I started playing fullback in that year. But you had a sense that, there wasn't, people weren't hungry enough to do it again. And so we started going off in different directions. And that's when I was like, oh, maybe I should sort of look elsewhere. And, my contract was coming up for negotiation. Sales sort of messed me around a little bit and didn't really, value, I always think with young players who've shown that they can cut it at the top, they're the guys you need to be investing in. And they sort of, didn't bring a good offer to the table. So I went off and had conversations with the likes of Worcester and Northampton, and obviously Jim being there. And I played for England under 21s that year as well, and did the England Sevens circuit. And he was very, Northampton had gone down, they were coming back up, they were bringing in young players, and they were going to invest in the youth. And if I went there, I'd be starting, I'd be in the mix. Be a good opportunity for me to help them build a future for the club. And so it was an easy decision in the end. It helped that they were paying me a lot more money, but Jim was someone I worked with before, and I knew he was the right guy to steer the ship. And I knew other guys that they were signing. They already had Dylan Hartley. I spoke to him. Lee Dixon was coming, who was going to be my competition for the 9 shirt. Bruce Rehana was there. I was a big fan of him, knew what he was about. And so I knew that they were making good signings, and the club was heading in the right direction. So it was I felt like Sale had sort of run its course as well. I'd had a lot of fun being there, but like I said, I had the feeling that things were changing there. And it wasn't long. I think Philippe left a year after me, and Kingsley Jones took over, and it went through the whole process of changing up. And they're in a much better position there from where I left them now. But Northampton as well, being like a rugby mad town, and like everything is sort of like revolves around rugby. It's very different from what Manchester was like, because obviously Manchester United, Manchester City, there's nothing more disappointing than going to Carrington and training when it was pissing down in rain and a miserable day, and we'd be dragging out tackle shields, and you'd look across the field to the boys at Man United, and they're all sitting underneath their beautiful facility. We're not training today, it's raining, and be like,
yeah.
Oh, so coming to Northampton was definitely a change, because everyone knows you as well. You walk through the town centre and everyone says hello, and they say good luck for the weekend and all that sort of stuff. And so it was a real sort of shock to me, but it's one of the reasons why I sort of fell in love with the club and the town, is just that Franklin's Gardens is still to this day my favourite ground to play at. I think it's just, I've played in some, played at Eden Park and obviously Twickenham and all these great venues, and there is something so special about it. So special about sort of the field as well. We always had such a good groundsman who was, just as meticulous as the coaching and the players in making it such a good surface. And then obviously when you're playing at home, the idea is you always turn your home ground into a fortress. No one gets easy points there. You win all your home games, nick a few away ones, and you can get yourself up into the top sort of top 4 or top 6. And so we had a plan. We made the top 6, I think, in our first year there, so we could play Heineken Cup rugby. And from that point, we never really left the top 4. We were always there and thereabouts. I mean, there was a lot of times we were bridesmaids and never the bride, but we managed to get there in 2011.
In that swap from Sale to Northampton, one of the things from the sort of externally that was sort of a vision was you came to play 9. Obviously, part of that, was that part of your decision process?
Well, yes. Jim was very clever in what he did. He sort of promised me that I'd play 9. He promised me that I'd play 9. I played 9 for him in the under 21s, and so. He sort of knew what he was doing, because he said to me, in the contract I signed as well, I got more money if I started games. And so he would say, listen, you're going to do 3 or 2, 2 on, 3 off with Dicko, and you can either bench as a 9 and come on for 20 minutes, or you can start as a 15, cover 9, and we'll put a back 3 on the bench instead of a 9. And obviously, being young and wanting to play rugby, I was like, listen, I'm going to play. Obviously, I want to play, so put me on the field to play 15. And after about 6 games, people started writing me up and saying things like, "Oh, if Ben Foden actually, really put himself forward as a 15 and made that position his and stopped sort of messing around, he could be England's starting fullback. But I was involved in the England team as a 9. And I played in that Six Nations against Italy. I came off the bench and played my first game as a 9. Didn't play very well, I should say.
I was at that game. Were you opposite Bergamasco?
I was, yeah. And the thing is, so what was supposed to happen is Danny Care was supposed to start and I was supposed to bench. And Danny Care, Shane Garrity and myself were messing around with tackle bags in the snow. And we were trying to surf them down hills. And Danny slipped up and rolled his ankle. So Harry Ellis, who was sort of like around the fringes but was coming back from a bad injury, he got called in, and obviously I'd never started, so that he jumped ahead of me and started at 9, and he got bloody man of the match in that game, and actually went on a Lions tour off the back of that. So Danny's never forgiven himself because he felt that if he'd have played that game, he might have got man of the match, and then he would have been the guy going on a Lions tour and all that sort of thing. So a little bit of regret from everyone on all sides. But then sort of left the squad. Then was playing more at fullback and playing really well. And sort of said, right, you know what? I had a meeting with Jim and said, listen, I just want to play fullback now. And we had Alan Dickens there, who's an experienced 9, to sort of swap in with Dicko. So, yeah, my dad always wanted me to play 9 as well. He played scrum half, played all my age group rugby scrum half, played for England 16s, 17s, 18s, 19s, 21s, did 21s 2 years at 9. And so I put a lot of time and effort into 9, but I think that's what helped me play defensive roles and that sort of stuff, and ball positioning and where the 10 stands to kick the ball. I had a good understanding of that, and so it sort of translates quite well. And I'd also say that playing 7s when I did for 2 years really sort of made me attacking minded, that I became a player who was always looking for space. And I was always known as an attacking 9 rather than a passing 9. And so the transition was sort of there to sort of like, it made things very easy, and the decision actually came quite easy for me to make that decision.
Yeah, I actually, I was very excited when you signed for Saints. I went out and got a Ben Foden number 9 shirt. So it obviously, didn't last too long, but yeah.
Well, my dad would be sometimes I do look back at my career and think maybe I'd have lasted longer if I played at 9, because, being a 15, you rely so much on speed. And to be honest, when I got older, I changed the way I played. It was a lot more tactical, more positioning. Whereas when I first started, it was just about, running the ball back and being attacking. And so as soon as I got some bad injuries around the age of sort of 26, 27, 28, I did my ankle first and then both knees. And I lost that yard of speed that sort of made me so explosive. And I sort of think to myself, I'm watching Danny Care, who's still playing there now, and he was sort of my competition. Ben Youngs was a few years after me, but similarly, and those guys playing for a lot longer. And seems that, maybe if I had stuck to their 9 position, I could have had a little bit more durability and last a little longer in the Premiership.
Yeah, Ben, did Philip Sant-Andre ever send you his beret? Because he quoted saying
he ate it. He ate it.
No, he said, if you're not a fullback, he will eat his French beret.
Well, again, this is the thing. When you've just got your dad saying you should be 9, you should be a 9, you should be a 9, but you're having conversations with the like of Jim Malander and Philippe Sant-Andre and Jason Robertson and Mark Cueto, and even I saw Austin Healy and other people along my travels, and they're all saying, "What are you doing? Just play 15." And one of the guys who actually really did talk me into it was Nick Abendenham. He was a really good friend of mine. He said to me, "Dude, what are you doing? Just go and play 15 and play for England." And I was like, well, that's a guy who I'm going to be competing against, and he's saying that, so I really should just sort of, I think that was one of the deciding factors, that when your sort of adversary sort of saying to you, "Listen, you're playing so well, play for England." I thought I have to turn around to Dad and just say, "Dad, I'm talking to people who are a little bit more in the know than you. And as much as I love you, you can play 15."
I mean, you talk about, you think you'd have had more longevity if you played at 9. But if you think about the England caps, you think that you got more England caps because you played at fullback? Do you think you could have got more if
Yeah,
you played
well,
at scrum
again,
half?
you know, the only disappointing thing about my England run is that the last time I played for England, I was 28 years old, which means that, I should have been in my prime. And, I missed out on the 2015 World Cup because I tore my ACL, 4 or 5 months before, training camp started. And I went into training camp, and England were good to me. They helped pay for me to go and get my knee rehab in Philadelphia. And I got back to a point where I could go back into the squad. But I remember meeting up with the squad and doing some of the fitness, and I was way off the point. And to be honest, since that point, I was never really, in and around the team again. Twice I'd got too tired and then tried to force my way back into the squad. They were picking me to play on the wing a little bit more than 15 as well, because Mike Brown was playing so well and Goody was playing well. And so, I feel like, my prime, I sort of missed out on, if I could have the explosiveness and the pace that I had when I was 23, 24, and the rugby knowledge and experience of being 28, 29, I felt that, I sort of missed a trick there. And it wasn't till, the year we won the Premiership, which was in 2013, which one did we win?
14.
14.
The year before that, I was really in form. So 2000, when we lost to Leicester, I got back into the stride of things and was, I went on tour with the team again. Went to New Zealand. I didn't play in the main fixtures, but played in the game against the Crusaders, and I felt like I was back to it. And then I picked up another bloody injury, and that was the end, really. And when Eddie Jones came in, I was petrified about going into the England squad when Eddie Jones was there, just because I knew my fitness levels weren't where they needed to be, and I knew he ran a real, tight ship and ran the boys real hard. Because I heard that the Japanese guys used to complain about him, saying, he works us too hard. And then, talking to the boys who are in the England fold, it was very tough camp when Eddie was there. And I knew my mind wasn't right and my body wasn't right. And so, I knew I was never really going to play for England again. And I was coming sort of to the age of 30, 31. So it didn't really make sense for him to be, looking at me.
It must have been an interesting period, though, because through the period of time there as an England coach, you've said you've got 2011, you've got Jono, who's a legend in his first role as head coach of England. You then move on to Stuart Lancaster, who's a very different individual, but incredibly successful as a coach. And then Eddie's Eddie, isn't he? I mean, and compare that to your club career, where you had a very stable setup with Jim at Northampton for so long. That must have been, very different for you to try and get into the England squad with the changes, etc.
Well, yeah, and the thing is as well is that coaches, they always say they don't have their favourites, but they always do. And even breaking into the England squad with Jono, and Brian Smith was the backs coach there, and he was London Irish, and Dylan Armitage was playing very well for London Irish, and so he was sort of his favourite. And so it took a while for me to break in and take the show off Dylan, and he got moved to the wing, and we had a run together of playing in the back three. And then obviously when Jono left, Stuart came in. I was with Stuart and they were interim coaches, and then I got injured, after playing for them for 1 year, and then Brownie came in and started playing well. And he put money in the bank because he was consistently one of England's best players playing in that position. And so again, it became very hard for me to break into the side. And so whenever that happens and there's a change of the guard, it is about getting in there and sort of earning your stripes. And probably where I was a little bit foolish is that I always sort of put Northampton above everything else. And I realized the guys who had a very long, successful England career put England above everything else. I think Dylan Hartley did that towards the end of his career when he became captain of England. He made it his priority to be fit and healthy to play for England. Obviously, he bleeds black, green, and gold and loved Northampton, but he knew that, value-wise, contract-wise, if he was captain of England, Northampton wanted him there. Do you know what I mean? And so I was always just wanting to play the game. So I always rushed back from injuries, which was a bit foolish of me, really, because, you rush back from injuries from your club, is one thing, because Jim knows me so well that he knows how well I can play. He knows where I'm up to in the injury. But with England, if you are 5-10% off, it shows. And then, the money in the bank that I talk about, it dwindles very quickly, and sort of you're off the scene. And I feel that's what probably happened to me.
Yeah, Ben, going back a little bit, when you first joined Saints and a young man called Chris Ashton joined, what could you explain how you and him were so in sync? Because watching you two play was just insane.
Yeah, we were very different players. So Ashy, apart from the one very famous try where he steps through Mitchell and goes the length of the field against Australia, have you ever seen Chris Ashton use a good step and beat a man one-on-one? So his ability to just run fast and sniff out opportunities, he changed. I always say this to Ashy because he sort of changed the way that everyone sort of played the game. Wingers played the game, and doing these rugby league lines where he'd run behind defenders on the premises that Bruiser or myself were going to make a break and then put him away. And so I always knew whenever I counter-attacked or I beat a defender and broke the first line, and there's always a covering fullback, a covering wing, a 9. There's always someone else. I knew he was going to pop up somewhere. And so whether it was, as soon as I made a break, if he was on my right, I always knew to head that way. And so if I broke on the left, I knew to head in field because he'd always be there for that final pass. And he was so fit that literally he could sprint the same speed in minute 1 to, minute 83. He would be running the same pace. And he was quick. So, it was just he knew to get on my shoulder, and he knew the players who were, more likely to make breaks. And he just had an engine that would always put him in the right position to score tries. And he just had a nose for it. And so it became sort of a running joke between us that, I do the hard work and he runs it in.
It's fair enough.
And so what was it like? We also got to talk about the Premiership final in 2014. That must have been an incredible experience to lift that trophy, especially considering that you've mentioned before, the year before, that kind of unfortunate sort of loss to Leicester.
Yeah. Well, the big thing was we'd been to 2 major finals and lost them both and come up short, being against Leinster in the Heineken Cup final, which was one of my favourite years playing rugby. I thought we were such a gritty side, and we didn't really have any superstars. We had a few guys who were up and coming, but to do what we did, we went undefeated in the Heineken Cup, for everything but for 40 minutes, I always say. And so we came up short there, and then we lost in the semi-final of the Premiership that year as well. I think that wasn't the year we lost to Leicester in the semis when Manu punched Chris, and Chris got bloody sunbinned as well, which was ridiculous. And then he didn't play in the final against Harlequins, who won the whole thing. So we've been to we were a very talented squad by the time we went to the final in 2013. I felt that if Dylan didn't get sent off, we probably would have won that game, especially because Courtney or Sam had smoked Toby Flood, and he'd gone off injured, and a very young George Ford came on. He did actually very well, but if we'd had 15 guys, it could have been a different story. So to do it the next year was just sort of like, relief that we'd managed to do it and see it across the line. Annoyingly, we went and finished the Premiership at the top and played. I think we played Saracens in the semi-final and lost them the next year, and I was injured for that game as well. And there was a few mistakes made in the backfield that sort of cost us. And I remember chatting to Alan Dickens, and he was like, if you were fit and healthy, we'd have won that game and gone to another final. So there's a little bit of regret there, but, some injuries have put me out some teams. But just for me, getting the first Premiership trophy for Northampton was an unbelievable achievement, and the appreciation that the town had for it. We did the open bus journey that I've just seen the boys do. There is no better feeling when everyone comes out from Northampton and shows their support. So it was very special, and to this day, probably one of my favourite moments. Obviously, I'd won the Premiership with Sale, but I was off the bench and hadn't really influenced the year that much with a handful of games. But to be a consistent starter throughout the year and see it out and play the full 120 minutes, whatever it was, and the way it won as well was epic. It must go down as one of the best finals to watch because. We won it with a very, in the last seconds, against probably a team that were had won it many a times, and sort of were sitting on top of the world. So to beat the best in the way we did was pretty epic.
It's the only way Northampton to do it nowadays is last minute. Put the fans through it. Were you watching the final this year?
I did, yeah. I watched it at home on the TV, and I kind of like laughed to myself because one position that Northampton are excelling at is the 15. Obviously, we've got Furbank, who's sort of the starter, but Tommy Freeman started out as a fullback. Obviously, he's been pushed to the wing and he's excelling and playing for England there. I know that Hendy started as a fullback. We've got Ram, who's a fullback. And I like to think that, these young guys have all come to Northampton because they watched me play and they were like, hey, we want to play with Ben Foden. So, I'm delighted for how, Phil Dowson being a good mate of mine as well. And, when I left Northampton, it was a bit of a mess. I didn't really leave Northampton with a good taste in my mouth just because, I wanted to sort of finish my career out there, and just Jim had left. No one was really speaking to me about renewing. Harry Malander had just signed a monster contract that, with sort of signing him as the number one starting 15 for Northampton. And so I never really had a conversation with anyone about renewing. So it was a bit disappointing. And I got to the point where I was like, I can't really wait any longer. I need to sort of make a decision. And the opportunity to go and play in New York came up. So I was like, listen, I'm gonna go and play over there. So I'm so happy that the club is in a really strong and healthy position. And do you know what it was as well is, we talked about having favourites and sticking with players. I think that probably Jim's, biggest regret of his time being here is that he didn't reinvest in the youth. And Northampton have had such a good academy system coming through, and, being there, the likes of, Ferbs was being overlooked, Hutch was being overlooked. There was, Mooney wasn't really involved. Aaron Painter wasn't really involved. They were sort of very much second team players, sort of blooding them and putting them in. And what's happened in that sort of period where, Boydie came in and the transition happened is they went, right, we've got to change things. We've got to get rid of a load of players. We keep experienced guys, the guys that are still sort of playing for England and that sort of stuff, but we're going to invest in the future. And they did that. And it works. And, I look at a lot of other Premiership clubs and I think, now that they've closed the gates on promotion and demotion, that's where everyone should sort of be investing, invest in your academy, your homegrown guys. And you can afford to sit there and not be at the top of the Premiership for 2 or 3 years, but give them the experience at the age of like 20, 21. And by the time they're 23, 24, and they're firing and they're confident and, you really do see the rewards of it. And I think that you've seen that with the likes of Furbank, Freeman, Hendy. Finn Smith was a great signing from Worcester Warriors when they folded. He really was, an inspirational signing. And then, forwards, they always win games. If you can get parity, beefing up the pack, getting some enforcers. I think I went in shadow coach behind Phil Dowson and co for a couple of weeks in the year where, we reached the top 4, but we didn't quite have enough defensively. And that was the area they really needed to work on. So physicality was the big point where they needed to match the big teams. And so with the physicality that's been brought into the team, they brought some enforcers, they changed the defensive coach, getting off the line and making big hits became sort of, what Northampton are all about. And they always had the flair and ability to score tries. And so put that together and they found the winning formula. And so very excited to see what this team can do over the next 2 or 3 years, because I think that they have the caliber to sort of, get back up there and win another couple.
No, definitely. Yeah. No, brilliant. We really appreciate your time, and we don't want to keep you for too much longer, that's for sure. But it'd be really interesting to get a view on, obviously, going to the States at the end of towards the end of your career and playing out there. There must have been a really different experience from being involved with England, involved with Northampton, etc.
Yeah, it's a million miles away. But I wanted something different. I wanted to sort of lower the sort of physicality of the rugby as well. When you play in the Premiership every week's a tough game, and your body really can tell. And as I said, I had some bad injuries, so it wasn't that it was easier there. It was just a faster moving game without, defense is such a big part of Premiership rugby, and limiting the amount of tries scored was always sort of, if you could score 20 points and make sure that you only conceded 1 or 2 tries a game, you were sort of always in a good place. Whereas American rugby, it's a spectacle sport. They want to score a lot of tries, a lot more attacking, a lot more fast flowing. And so I enjoyed that sound of it. It was at the very beginning, it's where Major League Soccer was 20 years ago. So it's still very much figuring things out. And sadly, the team that I played for has since dissolved. They were owned by the Bolton family, who owned Crusaders, and they got involved, and they won the championship and did what they set out to do. And they had a buyer lined up, but sadly it fell through. And it seems that every year you sort of lose 1 or 2 teams and you get 2 or 3 joining. So it's trending in the right direction, but they've got to find a way to monetize it in America, because that's what they're big on. They're just, sports is very much a business out there. It's about making money. It's about, TV rights. It's about, gambling on the sport, about, creating superstars and having personalities and being in the media and all that sort of stuff. And so the World Cup bid in 2031 is what they're all gearing towards, to try and get the MLR to a point where it can kick on after doing that. And so there's a big ask in doing that, because you've got a limited time, but it is getting better. I knew that the international rugby are working very hard with USA Rugby, which has been in a rut for the last 4 or 5 years, going bankrupt and coming back up. And I think now it's got its act together. USA Rugby are working with the MLR. IRB have created this team called Anthem, who is all about developing young talent through America. So I think the right things are happening, and I'm very hopeful, because I think that if rugby does take off in America, it will change the way that sport is played across the planet. And the main thing being that, in my opinion, Premiership rugby is far too long. The season is too long. If you're an international rugby player, playing 35 games a year is just not doable. And the way American sport is done is there's usually a 4 or 5 month window to you to play. And if rugby gets big in America, that's all will happen. You'll play for 5 months of the year, and you'll have the other 7 months to sort of look after the body, do other things, and I think that does help. And I think that's one of the reasons why, Southern Hemisphere rugby is dominated for so long, because their really intense rugby season, playing Super Rugby, was a lot shorter. Yeah, they played provincial rugby, but it wasn't as, taxing. And I say the same thing, why Leinster are so great and Munster are so great, is that, no offense to the Irish, Welsh and Scottish League, it's a little bit less taxing. There's games where you can afford to send your second team and still get a victory, because it's not important. Whereas in the Premiership, you've got to play and win every game if you want to be in the top 4. And then they really, the Irish teams really focus their attention on the Champions Cup, and that's why they've been able to dominate that league for so long.
Yeah. One final question from me, Ben. Sorry. Who is the best player you've played with, played against, and wish you'd ever played with, had on your side?
The best player I ever played with is Jason Robinson. And the only reason is just that he was just so physically gifted. It was just nuts. And he used to do these faces when he'd blow out of his cheeks and puff them out, and you just knew you were never going to get anywhere near it. And he had such a glittering career. And I was lucky enough to play in his last ever game. We played against Bath at home, and we were losing. I was playing 9 at the time, but we were losing by 3 points, 4 points it might have been. And we had a scrum in the last play, and the whole move was just get the ball to Robbo in space, and we did that, and everyone knew it was coming, and he beat his guy 1-on-1 and scored a try, and I was just like, this guy is just different gravy. Even in his later stage of his career, he was just so awesome to watch. And I used to love watching him when I was younger, because every time he got the ball, you knew something exciting was going to happen, and that's why I sort of put my career on. I wanted to be an exciting player that would get people in the stands off their seats, whether it was from 10 meters off my own line or 5 meters from their line. It was just, he was just so exciting to watch, and I loved him. Playing wise, I played 9 against Justin Marshall when he was playing for the Ospreys, I think. And he was coming towards the end of his career, and when everyone was expecting me, and he schooled me so badly. He was so strong, and like manhandled me on the field. I think we did win the game, but I just remember thinking in that game, Jesus, you can tell why he was so, held in such high regards as a 9. And him and Georgie Gregan and Youth van der Westhuizen were the guys I used to watch when I was growing up. So it was awesome to play against him, but awesome, also to realize, I got a lot to learn about the game of rugby, because although I was probably fitter and quicker than him, he was stronger, way more tactical, way more on the ball, and sort of taught me a lesson. And what was the last one? So they were the guys.
It was just who you'd wish you'd played with.
Oh, Jonah Lomu, 100%.
Wow.
And the reason is because there are some guys who come into sports who are just, they are game changers. And Jonah Lomu was probably one of the biggest reasons that professional rugby became professional rugby. I remember playing the game of Jonah Lomu rugby, with my brother growing up, and just, what a man, what he did for the game. And I don't know how, but we used to watch on Sky, but we used to watch on, all the Hurricanes games of when he played. And the back three of him, Christian Cullen was another favourite of mine, were just breathtaking to watch. And although I loved watching Georgie Gregan and Justin Marshall and those guys, because they pull the strings, there was nothing better than watching a counter-attack try run in by Christian Cullen and Jonah Lomu. They really were the epitome of counter-attack rugby. And that's part of the excitement of rugby. And I think that everyone, wants to play the game like those guys did.
Brilliant. Yeah. Just one more question. Sorry, it's one we asked Christian, and I think you're one of the few people that can actually answer in the same manner. You mentioned both of them in the interview, but you've got a 10-meter channel to defend. Sammy Manoa, Sebastian Chabal. Which one are you taking?
Power and explosiveness. Chabal's horrible. Like, he was so strong in the gym and that sort of stuff. But I honestly believe that Sam Manoa at one point was probably the best rugby player in the world. I genuinely believe that he would do things in, he was running catch kickoffs with one hand. And I remember when he broke through and beat Goody with a big step. And that's the problem with big guys. I always said this about why playing Tuolangi, Manu, was such a nightmare, is that when he made a break, he could step you, he could run round you because he was quick, and then he could run over you. So as a fullback, you're like, what am I doing here? Am I getting ready to sort of, speed bump him and try and drag him down or is he going to step me so I've got to guess away, or am I going to try have to run him down because he's going to curve out? And so they're the nightmares that you always face. Whereas I feel that Chabal is only going one way. He's going to try and run you over. With Sam, there's always the chance he makes you look silly, like Goody. He really did make Goody look silly, because everyone's expecting him to bowl him over, and he brought out a left foot step. Goody falls over and he runs on sticks. And as a fullback, I think that's your biggest worry, is that you have a guy who makes you look silly. So Sam Manoa probably would be the nightmare to fight for pace in the 10-meter channel.
Brilliant. Thank you again, once again. And thanks everyone for listening. It's been a great episode. Please remember to follow us on socials and leave feedback. Thank you very much. So goodbye from me. Goodbye from everyone else.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, guys.